Hello, I'm Joshua, and I'm an INTP, and first and foremost, I would like to say thank you for viewing this video and subsequently visiting my channel. The topic of this video will be on ENTJs. And so the first thing I would like to say about the ENTJ is that they are objectative in their perceptual scheme. The ENTJ looks to establish themselves in the environment through looking at the environment on what they can rely on in consistent patterns and movements from thing to thing. Whether they're looking to connect the movement and patterns and motions of the world through the population that surrounds them, the systems that they're interested in, or the philosophical and moral movements, the ENTJ is the personality type that's primary orientation is to use patterns to overcome the faults and limitations of themselves and of others. So the ENTJ's meta goal is to champion themselves in such a way in the world that they can overcome what things people would consider the tragic and existential elements of life. Primarily this. The ENTJ is a dominant extroverted thinker. So they look to move and animate things in the world. Animate things in the world primarily to the core of their being. Primarily to the core of their desires and what they want to see, because for them it is so apparent that the world is subjugating towards individuals. They tend to be subjugative towards other individuals, and they tend to be subjugative towards the world, not because they merely want to dominate it, but because they see quite clearly that if they don't establish something out in the world, it does not mean that the world is going to leave them alone, or that the world isn't going to try and act and move upon them. They wish to protect themselves. Their tendency to be leaders, their tendency to be generals, is this thing of taking and moving forward to face something so that they do not have to be dominated by something. They have introverted intuition that looks and projects something out into the motions and the patterns of the plurality and the empirical facts. An ENTJ does not mind being blunt and gritty, or somewhat just a lot of times people can find them crass or rude, but it's because the ENTJ is an empiricist. They're looking at the world and they know the phenomenological landscape in a very vague manner. They have these strong impressions and visions that guide them, but they have an interesting but yet sticky mooring to the anthropomorphic structures that are in them. They know that they can feel things, but they don't like to feel things, because it's too strong of an agency in them, because it's completely unfettered. It's fairly unnuanced. So when they experience something in themselves, it is a beckoning and a calling that has the strongest nature, probably stronger than one would think. It's more akin, their introverted feeling is more akin to when an analogy is like in X-Men when Cyclops takes off his glasses. If they don't have the extroverted thinking to dominate, the introverted feeling will blast into their sphere and into space in such a manner that rather than it being a constructive agent, it's a fairly destructive one, insofar as they can feel too strongly and it can drive them to a place where they would not like to go, because the ENTJ is an extrovert, and so their primary concern is to experience positive effects from the environment. They're higher in trait dopamine, and so it's an extroversion essentially from a neuroscientific standpoint, and is an index for positive emotion. Does not mean that ENTJs look to be happy, but ENTJs definitely look to take and advance themselves through the environment because they have such a strong agency and mooring from this dopaminergic system. The dopamine system in the brain is a part of the reward network. So the ENTJ has norepinephrine and dopamine directing them towards ends and metrics. That's why they have to be in the world achieving and doing something, and it's why they don't mind to some extent taking and mobilizing people. They don't mobilize and they don't dominate because they just like to be mean. They do it because they understand the necessity for competition insofar as this, that you better well show others that they cannot push you or they might tear and rip you to bits. You better show others that they cannot outwit you or they might try to deceive you and lie to you. It's because the ENTJ is very familiar with the motivational systems within people. They're very familiar with the fact that nature is mostly impartial and harsh. Very harsh and unforgiving. They know that it doesn't matter if somebody is sickly or weak. Nature is not going to show any beneficence or kindness on them. It's going to cull them and kill them. Not because it's a sort of nice hand, but just because it's indifferent. And they experience the totality of this difference in the repressive agencies that come on human beings. And about the last thing they want to feel is repressed. If you try and oppress or repress the ENTJ, they will fight you. And they will fight you because they have the humanistic kind of framework of man is here to overcome things in the world. Because as far as they can tell, they have things that they love, and don't let them tell you that that's not the case. They have things and people that they love. They're principally based, so they want to stand for things even if they don't voice these things in which they stand for. They definitely embody them, but not only that, they have these principles, peoples, and things, but these principles, peoples, and things always stand to be threatened by the external world, or by the desires and motivations of others, or by the scheming and manipulation of their enemies. They're always threatened. And if they could exist in the world in such a manner that they did not feel vulnerable and threatened, they would not fight. And they would like competition because the ENTJ definitely likes to have it such that hierarchies are established based on competence. And so they don't mind competing to see who's more competent, because that's honestly what they're asking, and that's the game that they're playing with another individual. Whether that's competency through the expression of their physical prowess, or it's competency in the expression of their intellectual capabilities, an ENTJ does not mind beating you in a game of football any more than they mind beating you in a game of Risk. And to them, they're essentially the same things. You will win in a game of football because you can physically outdo, but not only physically outdo, but mentally outdo your opponent. And you will win in a game of Risk because you can sit in such a manner with a poker face that could be intimidatingly psychologically jarring to them and maneuver and outwit them at the same time, while you put a little existential terror and fear into the individual. And so for them, they win the same game. And that's primarily what they're interested in doing. They're interested in doing and playing this thing of a meta game. And I don't mean meta, and that's their meta goal, to win the meta game, in this sense that they organize and they structure things because they see it like this. You can either move forward and advance, or you can be pulled back and behind, and that's because of their extroverted sensing. It pays one good dividends in the end to pay mind to the environment and to pay mind of how people and nature acts on oneself. And you do so that you can move forward in this sense. It doesn't pay to win in the moment. You can have something like luck, you can have something like the plurality and the chance and the happenstance of the world be something to establish a momentary success. But what about when it's so apparent that most people are going to lose? It's not just that they're concerned with how they'd lose, but they kind of slice up the world in situations where there are winnings to be had, but then there are losing that's so dictative that it causes such a deficit that it can equal tragedy. And so they're trying to win this thing of the meta game where they can iron out the potentially tragic elements and agencies of their existence. They'd like it such that they can win in a situation and a scenario, and that winning carry over into the next situation and the next scenario. Whether they're doing it with their establishment of friends, they're moving through social networks, they're choosing of majors in college, or they're bent towards certain types of jobs in hierarchical establishments. They do it because the pragmatic scope, the existential scope come to a melding in these individuals. But don't let that be the only thing that you think that lives inside the ENTJ. In fact, they're definitely empiricists and empirical epistemologists. They'll tell you quickly what you can't know and what you can know based off of just the pure brunt facts of the situation. Don't feed them bullshit, please. That will be their statement. But they also are these funny little they're vanguards. But they're vanguards in a way you wouldn't really think, because they have a taste and a flair for the aesthetics. This is something that lives in all introverted feelers. They have it as strongly in them as it is in the INFP. And in some ways it can blur. You may not always be able to tell with the way that they dress, but certainly if an ENTJ is going to lose, they're going to do it in such a manner that you say, damn, that person, that it was brilliant. Like, that's what, they don't want you to ever, it's like, even if they're gonna go out, they have to do it in such a way where they have style, and they care about style. Don't let them tell you that they don't, because it's how the vanguardish, eccentric, aesthetic little agent pops up in them, and honestly moves them around in the world, because it does come by way of their introverted feeling, and colors and flavors, the things that they do, because it's always peculiar when you walk into an ENTJ's room and you look at their possessions. If you look at what they own, you don't think that they're gonna have. You don't really think that in the room of say your manager at work's an ENTJ, and somehow you get invited into his or her space. You don't suspect that they're gonna have a library of books that range from calculus to poetry to Dr. Seuss books to having the poster for Pulp Fiction with Uma Thurman posted on it on the wall, a host of quotes by Ayn Rand and Nietzsche on their Fight Club case. You don't and you don't think that they in the same corner would have a set of dumbbells. Like it's just it's a funny thing, and they will do things that with the it works for me, and it's not it works for me in the sense that they think that the world is as subjective as they like to express themselves in it, but it works for me in such a sense that I am a creative individual, and rarely do they openly say that, but let me tell you, they're trailblazers for the mere fact that they cannot help but leave themselves in everything that they do. And they're certainly individuals who are prone to experience transient hypofrontality more regularly than what one would think. A lot of the times when an ENTJ is in distress, what they will turn to do is to get themselves out in the world and moving. They'll run or they'll walk. They'll do something in a passive sense, so that their frontal regions can downregulate and they can be struck with their introverted intuitive revelations, and they lend themselves to be such to the ENTJ that they can find a niche, or they can find a way out, or they can leverage something, or they have to really consider a problem in a new way. And they're brilliant problem solvers in this respect, because don't ever count them out for the mere fact that they certainly overcome for a multitude of reasons, that they don't mind doing the thinking, they don't mind doing the grudge work, and they don't mind being open to what could possibly occur and the serendipity of the anthropomorphic and creative items that exist in their subjective landscape, to be guiding shamanic agents to them. And they can be as confident as they are sensitive as individuals. And they're just a very interesting and peculiar type of individual, because they are certainly the ones that overcome things in the world on multiple frontiers, and they pride themselves in their ingenuity and their it's not excellence necessarily, though that's what Aristotle says. It's mostly this: an ENTJ wants to trust themselves. They want to have a self-reliance and an assurance of self that can express itself through throughout a multitude of experiences. And if you have to describe them as anything, I don't necessarily agree with the field marshal thing, because it makes it seem as if the ENTJ just wants to dominate. They don't mind beating you, and they certainly don't want to be a victim. And it's definitely, they don't like victim mentality, and they don't want to be a victim. And it's definitely those aversions to those things that drive them in the opposite direction. But the ENTJ is the woodsman, the intellectual, machinist. They're definitely the person that is hit with a problem, and they say, I'm going to hit it a few times, doesn't work, let me think about it, doesn't work, come up with something new, try it out, and keep going until you make it. And so the ENTJ is the one who overcomes, and they're just really cool and interesting types. And so this is my first go at it. You can let me know what you think. I was trying to be fair and accurate. I'll say this finally, that the ENTJ can live in a howling wilderness and still smile. So, with that said, thank you for watching, and that's my video.